Ancient Egypt was not the golden paradise of history books. It was a brutal, dirty, and paranoid reality. Daily survival depended on a forced intoxication to avoid contaminated water, while the basic diet destroyed teeth as if chewing glass. It was a civilization of extreme contradictions. They poisoned themselves with lead for aesthetics and cured infections with crocodile dung, all while living a sexual freedom unthinkable for the time. Here, the law did not imprison, it mutilated faces, and religious devotion could cost the life of anyone who touched a sacred pet. Between construction technologies that science still cannot explain and the collective terror of final days where reality supposedly collapsed, this is the uncensored chronicle of existence on the Nile. This is what actually happened during a month in the life of an Egyptian. Sacred pets, when killing a cat was a death sentence. Nowadays, if you run over a dog, it is a tragedy. In ancient Egypt, it was a capital crime that provoked international riots. Devotion to animals was not pet love, it was an absolute theological fanaticism, a bloody red line that no one, not even the most powerful empire in the world, could cross. To understand the madness, let's look at a real historical event documented by Diodorus Siculus. A Roman soldier, part of a diplomatic delegation in Egypt, accidentally killed a cat. Rome was the superpower, the masters of the Mediterranean. But that didn't matter. A mob of enraged Egyptians surrounded the barracks. They weren't asking for apologies, they were asking for blood. Despite the pleas of Pharaoh Ptolemy XII, who was terrified of a war with Rome, the mob stormed the place and lynched the Roman soldier. They preferred to risk the annihilation of their country rather than forgive the death of a feline. That is not love. It is collective psychosis. But behind this sacred fervor hid one of the darkest and most macabre industries of antiquity, the mummy factory. Archaeologists have found catacombs not with one or two mummies, but with millions. Millions of ibises, hawks, cats, crocodiles, and dogs, piled up in infinite tunnels. For years we thought they were beloved pets that died of old age. The forensic reality is much more sinister. Modern scans reveal the truth. Most of these animals were puppies or juveniles with their necks deliberately broken. Here, the market of faith theory is born. Temples were not just places of worship, they were industrial sacrifice farms. They bred thousands of animals in overcrowded conditions only to be killed, mummified, and sold to pilgrims as express offerings. If you want the goddess Batet to hear you, buy this mummified cat. It was a religious scam on an industrial scale. Imagine the stench, the noise of thousands of caged animals waiting for their turn to have their necks snapped by priests, all under the facade of sanctity. It is the commercialization of divinity in its crudest form. Pilgrims bought these mummies believing they were sending a message to the gods, unaware that they were sometimes buying fakes. Mummies stuffed with sticks and mud that priests sold as real animals to increase the profit margin. A society capable of lynching a man for an accident with a stray cat, but which at the same time maintained an industrial machinery of cat slaughter to profit from the faith of the poor. The perfect duality of a civilization trapped between sublime devotion and absolute corruption. The drunkenness diet, drunk by law and glass bread? Imagine a world where the vital liquid, water, is your death sentence. A bacterial breeding ground so foul that a single drink could finish you off in hours amidst spasms and fevers. The solution of this civilization? Living in a perpetual state of alcoholic intoxication. We are not talking about a weekend party. We are talking about a biological survival policy that became a mental cage. From dawn until dusk, men, women, and even young children drank nothing but a thick, cloudy, and lukewarm beer. It was not the refreshing drink you know today. It was a fermented porridge, a liquid bread, loaded with sediment that filled the stomach but clouded the mind. The reality is grotesque when you analyze it closely. An entire population, from childhood, operating with a constant level of alcohol in the blood. The workers who built empires did not do it sober, they did it under a euphoric haze, anesthetized against muscle pain and extreme fatigue. This is where the darkest theory comes in. Was this a fortunate accident of fermentation, or the most brilliant and perverse mass control strategy in history? A perpetually drunk society does not rebel. A mind numbed by hops and barley does not question the pharaoh or the foreman. The drunkenness diet guaranteed docile subjects, happy in their misery, staggering on a tightrope between nutrition and functional alcoholism. But if the drink kept you docile, the food destroyed you from the inside. This is where the true physical horror comes in, the glass bread. Forget soft and fluffy bread. The milling technology of the time was primitive and brutal. They used coarse stones that crumbled during the process. Add to this the omnipresent desert sand that seeped into every grain of flour. The result was not food, it was edible sandpaper. Every bite was a microscopic torture. Chewing meant rubbing your teeth against thousands of particles of silica and rock. Dental wear was not a possibility, it was a mathematical certainty. The skeletons found do not lie. Devastated mouths, molars reduced to flat craters, exposed nerves, and infected jaws that oozed constant pain. Imagine the sound inside your skull while chewing. Crunch, crunch, crunch. A grinding of stones pulverizing your tooth enamel until reaching the living root. People didn't just die of diseases, they died of hunger because the pain of eating became unbearable. They were 20 years old and had the smile of a decrepit old man. And therein lies the cruel irony of the system. To relieve the agonizing pain of a mouth full of exposed nerves, what did they do? They drank more of that thick beer. A perfect cycle of sedation and destruction. They lived drunk to forget they were eating glass. A society built on numbed backs and broken smiles, where sobriety was as dangerous as the river water. Deadly beauty, lead in the eyes and the obsession with baldness. If you look at the hieroglyphs and statues, you see a civilization of smooth skin, shaved heads, and piercing eyes marked by perfect black lines. We have been sold this as the pinnacle of elegance and ancient fashion. A lie. It was not fashion, it was a desperate biological war against filth and a slow death sentence disguised as cosmetics. Let's start with the obsession with baldness. Forget the idea of a refined aesthetic choice. The reality was that the environment was a breeding ground for parasites. Lice were not an occasional nuisance, they were a constant biblical plague. In a world without chemical shampoos or modern hygiene, human hair was a nest of infections. The solution was radical. The total elimination of the habitat. Priests, nobles and commoners shaved their entire bodies, head, eyebrows, eyelashes, pubic hair, not for style, but out of pure panic of being eaten alive by parasites. The wigs they wore were not vanity accessories, they were shields, ventilated hats that could be removed for delousing or burning if the infestation was uncontrollable. Imagine the constant sensation of phantom itching, the paranoia of feeling something crawling on your skin, leading an entire society to live under the bronze and flint blade, scraping their skin to daily irritation just to avoid becoming a banquet for insects. But if the fight against lice was brutal, the fight to protect the eyes was suicidal. This is where the iconic kohl enters, that thick black eyeliner that defines the Egyptian gaze. We have been told it was to protect against the glare of the desert sun, like modern American football players, or to repel the flies that transmitted eye infections. And it's true, it worked. But the price was astronomical. The main ingredient of that black paste was galena, a lead mineral. Think about it for a second. They smeared lead, a highly neurotoxic heavy metal, directly onto the most sensitive and absorbent mucous membrane of the body, the edge of the eyelids. Day after day, year after year, they were pumping poison directly into their bloodstream and their brains. Lead does not leave the body. It accumulates. It causes neurological damage, madness, infertility, acute abdominal pain, and kidney failure. Here an unsettling theory arises that historians often overlook. Was this civilization unaware that they were slowly killing themselves, or did they know something we don't? There is a hypothesis that, by processing the lead, they created lead salts that, in low doses, stimulated the immune system by producing nitric oxide, killing eye bacteria. But at what cost? Could it be that the supposed stability of this culture was marked by a nobility suffering from chronic lead poisoning? Does this explain the erratic behavior, the hallucinations, or the paranoia of certain pharaohs at the end of their lives? They applied makeup to avoid going blind from infections, but in exchange, they sacrificed their sanity and their internal organs. It was a cosmetic Russian roulette, healthy eyes in poisoned bodies. A literally deadly beauty, where every stroke of eyeliner was one more nail in their own chemical coffin. Medicine of astonishment, crocodile dung and sleep therapy. Welcome to the emergency room of the ancient world, a place where the line between medical genius and absolute madness did not exist. If you fell ill here, you had two options: either you were cured with a surgical precision that defies modern logic, or you were killed by having filth smeared into your open wounds. Let's be clear, their pharmacopoeia was a gallery of horrors. For this civilization, excrement was not waste, it was an active ingredient. Imagine having a deep, bleeding, and pulsing wound. Instead of disinfectant, the doctor applies a hot paste made of animal dung. The logic was magical: to repel evil spirits with the foul smell, but the biological reality was a sentence of tetanus and massive gangrene. But the most grotesque use was reserved for women. The cutting-edge contraceptive method? A vaginal pessary made of crocodile dung mixed with honey. Think about it. Inserting the feces of a predatory reptile into the human body as a physical barrier. While the acidity of the excrement could kill sperm, the real contraceptive was the chronic pelvic infection that likely left the woman sterile, or dead. It was a gynecological Russian roulette played with fecal bacteria. However, and this is where the mind explodes, these same butchers of dung were capable of opening a human skull and keeping the patient alive. Trepanation. Drilling the skull bone to relieve pressure or release demons. We have found skulls with perfect holes, smooth and scarred edges. Do you know what that means? That the patient survived. They survived having their head drilled with stone and bronze tools, without anesthesia, feeling the vibration of the scraping in their own brain, and lived years later to tell the tale. How is such a level of surgical success possible while coexisting with the medicine of filth? Here we enter the realm of the inexplicable, in the dream temples. When physical medicine failed, they turned to incubation. The patient did not go to the doctor, they went to the temple to sleep. But it was not a normal sleep. It was an induced coma. The most disturbing theory suggests that these diagnoses did not come from observation, but from direct contact with something else. The air in these sanctuaries was dense, heavy with the thick fumes of unknown incense and burned herbs. Today we suspect they used potent psychoactive cocktails, blue lotus, opium, belladonna, to induce altered states of consciousness. The priests did not simply hypnotize you, they drugged you until the barrier of reality broke. In that state of hallucinatory trance, surrounded by sacred snakes slithering across the temple floor, the patient and the priest saw the entities. They were not dreams. They were visits. The theory suggests that complex medical recipes were not discovered by trial and error, but dictated by these entities during psychotropic trips. Was trepanation a technique taught by humans, or an instruction whispered by a collective hallucination that told them exactly where to cut so as not to kill? Ancient medicine was not science. It was a dark pact between the lowest biological filth and the highest hallucinations. They cured you with crocodile poop or drugged you until the gods told you how to operate on a brain. In either case, your life was in the hands of madness. Crime and punishment, the city of the cut noses. In our modern world, we believe in rehabilitation. We build prisons with courtyards and libraries. In the ancient world, justice did not seek to reform you, it sought to brand you. Your body was the canvas where the law wrote its sentence forever. The concept of serving time did not exist. If you stole, cheated, or conspired, the punishment was immediate, visceral, and permanent. Prison was not four walls, it was your own ruined face. Welcome to the reality of legal mutilation. The most common and feared sentence for serious crimes was not a quick death, but rhinectomies, the total amputation of the nose. Imagine the process. Without anesthesia, an executioner severing the cartilage and skin, leaving a dark, echoing hole in the center of your face. It was not just physical pain, it was the destruction of your human identity. Without a nose, you ceased to be a person in the eyes of gods and men. You became a breathing monster. But the horror did not end there. They did not let you go back home to hide your shame. The state had a final solution for this mass of disfigured people: rhinocolura. Historical texts mention it with a shiver, a fortress city built in the most hostile reaches of the desert, near the border with Gaza. It was not a normal penal colony. It was a city inhabited exclusively by convicts without noses. Imagine, if you dare, life inside those walls. The 5 cursed days, the terror of the epigomenal days. Imagine that the year does not end, but rather breaks. For the ancient Egyptians, the perfect calendar had 360 days. Everything functioned under Mot, the cosmic order. But the actual solar year has 365 days. Those 5 leftover days were not a vacation bonus, they were a crack in reality, an error in the matrix of the universe known as the epigomenal days. For 360 days, the gods protected Egypt. But during those 5 final days, the barriers between worlds dissolved. They were days outside of time, a chronological limbo where the laws of physics and magic ceased to function correctly. The terror was real and palpable. Papyri tell us that people paralyzed their lives. No one worked, no one traveled, no one started projects. It was an absolute lockdown driven by spiritual panic. Why? Because according to mythology, these were the days when the gods were born, including Set, the god of chaos, storms, and violence. It was said that Set was not born through natural birth, but instead tore through his mother's side to emerge. That violence permeated the air. This is where history blends with cosmic terror. Being outside of time, the protection of usual amulets and spells failed. Imagine a society obsessed with protective magic realizing that, for 5 nights, their shields are turned off. The streets remained deserted, plunged into a deathly silence. It was believed that during this period, entities that normally inhabit the Duat, the underworld, or the fringes of chaos could cross into the physical plane. They were not days to celebrate, they were days to hide. The darkest theory suggests they were days of the wild hunt. If you went out at night, you didn't risk being robbed. You risked encountering things that had no human form, hungry shadows taking advantage of the weakness of the dimensional barrier to feed on the vital energy, Ka, of the unwary. It was said that dying during these 5 days was the worst possible fate. If you died outside of time, your soul could be lost in the void, unable to find the way to the judgment of Osiris, condemned to wander eternally in nothingness, erased from existence. It was an annual spiritual purge. 5 days of psychological terror where pharaoh and peasant trembled alike, desperately waiting to see the dawn of the first day of the new year. The signal that the universe had returned to its orbit and the cages of hell had closed once again. Until then, Egypt held its breath, praying that nothing would knock on its door in the darkness.